Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. So with the collaboration between Raid and Assassin's Creed, we do have the fresh launch of a new event dungeon. So we're going to take a look at a couple of the teams that I put together for running this dungeon. But of course, we're also going to break down the boss and his abilities. I will say up front that this is definitely one of the more easy iterations of the event dungeon, just because the boss itself kind of somewhat determines the difficulty, and then the minions kind of determine how difficult the stage is to handle. But in this case, with the boss being a support champion there's not a high risk that he's going to kill you at any point. As long as you have a plan to deal with the minions, it's pretty much kind of smooth sailing after you get the minions down. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves now. Let's talk about the big bad boss and his abilities and what you have to worry about when going against him. So the big boss this time is Pontiff Augustin. He's technically part of the Assassin's Creed collaboration. However, he's not from the Assassin's Creed universe. So in terms of his abilities, let's start off in reverse order, because that is typically the order in which he's going to use his abilities. He starts off with the A3, where he will place increased accuracy for 2 turns and intercept across all allies for 1 turn, so 1 stack on everyone, including himself. And then it will fill the turn meter of the allies by 25% and then grant an extra turn, which will mean that he immediately will go into his A2, where he's going to do a full buff strip. This is not an attack, so it is affinity friendly in that regard. Granted, he's void affinity anyway, so that wouldn't matter, but nonetheless, it's just not an attack. And then he has a 100% chance of placing ensnare, or I guess he has a 75% chance, because I don't think the boss is booked, to be fair, so maybe it's not 100% chance. Anyways, but there's a chance that he places an ensnare debuff, and ensnare is a relatively new debuff that just means you cannot have your turn meter filled while that debuff is active. So any passives, masteries, active abilities, you cannot fill turn meter at all, so you have to cleanse that off before you can fill turn meter. One of the annoying things about this ability is that the ensnare debuff will ignore block debuffs if you're under 3 or more buffs, and obviously you typically do want to have a lot of buffs if you're trying to go first or anything like that. So you can kind of play with that a little bit. The thing is, anyways, he's really likely to land this regardless, because he's giving himself increased accuracy before going into a buff strip. So if you happen to have block debuffs out there, he's probably going to land it anyways, especially on anyone who's not built with high resistance. And then if you do happen to have more buffs, then it just ignores the immunity that you might have on your team anyways. So just plan for this to happen basically no matter what you do. In a lot of cases, again, unless you have a really high resistance person, or you have protected debuffs. But again, if you have too many protected debuffs, then it's going to land anyways, and it's going to ignore block debuffs. So make of that what you will. His last ability here on the A1 attacks one enemy and can place block active skills for 2 turns, and then will steal some turn meter if they have, or 5% turn meter for each buff on the target. So once again, I think the main thing to take away here is that there's not a lot of lethality in the kit. He's not really that likely to kill you like Corrosa, for example, was, or Queen of Hearts, who, AoE decreased defense on the A1. She can be very deadly. Odin could, one-shot people, with his enemy max HP hit. So he is very, very much a support. So he has a buff ability, extra turn into a debuff, buff strip ability into another debuff on the A1. So again, he's not likely to kill you. So really, you just have to worry about the minions on whatever stage you're farming, and then he's pretty much good to go. You're pretty much free to kill him in as much time as you like. In terms of the passives, there are a couple things to acknowledge here. I think this passive is kind of irrelevant for this instance, but maybe for like PvE when he actually becomes, or he is a champion in the game, but he's not currently in the summoning pool. But when he does become a normal champion in the summoning pool after the collaboration with Assassin's Creed ends, then allies will receive 25% less damage from enemies under block damage, unkillable, veil, perfect veil, or stone skin buffs. The more pertinent thing for this dungeon, albeit somewhat ignorable, is that anytime you receive a buff, you heal, or you have your turn meter filled, there's a 50-50 chance that he will decrease the duration of all your buffs by 1 turn. The rest of the passives are basically what you'd expect. He's immune to crowd control, enemy max HP is capped at 5%, you can't reduce his turn meter and or place decreased speed, HP burn cannot exceed 1%, so it's not the normal 3%, it's just the 1%. So standard stuff there. And of course, the higher awakening, the less damage you take, the more damage you do, etc. All of that is pretty par for the course. So realistically, if you have some sort of one-shot composition, then you don't really care about anything that he does, just because it's not that substantial. But if he does end up taking a couple of turns, some things that could help you survive are that, if you're worried about him removing your buffs and you're placing the ensnare, then whoever your cleanser is, if you have a cleanser on the team, then just delay their turn by 1 before they cleanse. That way you cleanse the ensnare afterward, and obviously you can have your buffs on after that. But just keep in mind, of course, that placing buffs, they can have their duration decrease, so they might just be outrun. Or you can try and put protection sets and whatnot to kind of combat that a little bit. But generally speaking, again, him cycling through his turns is not the most dangerous thing, and as long as you go first and you take care of the minions, he's really not much of a threat. So in terms of the dungeon stages to farm, as always, stage 20 is kind of the best one to farm in terms of efficiency. It's the best points per energy spent. It's affordable. You still get some 6-star gear, and it's just a good balance of like not too difficult, but also you're still getting relatively high level rewards. Step above that one would be working on stage 25, where it costs a little bit more energy, so it's a little bit less efficient, but you get a little bit better gear for a little bit extra cost. And then of course the gold standard would be if you can farm stage 30, and that would be the best possible gear quality overall. And then what's kind of new for this iteration is that they have these challenge stages, so stage 31 through 35, you really only have to beat them once, and there's one-time rewards. There's no energy cost at all, so these are just if you want to try your hardest to work on some relatively, or I should say surprisingly difficult stages. You can see here I did this on full manual. It took me 20 minutes, very, very slow approach there, but the minions are very annoying at stage 30 and beyond, so that was just kind of tricky. But anyways, you know, those are one-off, so we're talking here about, you know, farming the dungeon on auto, so those are kind of irrelevant. In terms of the showcase for today, I'm just going to focus in on stage 20 and stage 25. We're going to highlight the teams that I've built for those. And in my case, I tried out stage 30, but what I find, or like my thoughts when it comes to these types of stages are, if there's some, you know, RNG that's relatively unpredictable and hard to like perfectly counter every single time, then I just don't bother with it on auto, because I might just lose a run here and there because of bad RNG. And in this case, one of the minions on stage 30 and beyond is Hosan's Clef, which he has that passive where if you attack him at any point, there's a X% chance that he just cuts in and gets an instant turn, and then he can balance the health, so he can heal his whole team, and he can negatively turn meter balance your team to whoever has the lowest turn meter, which basically sucks away whoever your speed tune and whatever order your champions were going to go. And so because at any point when you attack him, he could just cut in and disrupt whatever you had your presets on auto. I just find it a pain to worry about stage 30, even though technically I did create a team that was able to beat it. I think it's just easier to farm things that are more consistent, more reliable. So hence my focus on stage 20 and stage 25. So starting with stage 20 is more of the example of just the go before the boss. You just kind of take him out as soon as possible before he really gets a turn to get going. And in this team, we have the lovely Whisper as our primary DPS. She's kind of our win condition as far as killing the boss is concerned. But as I mentioned, you do have to have some way to kill the minions. That would be ideal. So in this case, I'm running a Siphi, but that's just because it's increased defense for Harima and Marius. They're both defense-based. If you're running attack-based nukers, you're doing the same thing, AoE damage, then you'd be better off running Arbiter, for example, for a more free-to-play accessible option. And then Lydia could be any debuffer that you have, but she is one of the better ones on my account. I think probably like Venus would probably be best in class because she has decreased defense, or someone like that. Granted, that's another Void Legendary, but someone like that who has decreased defense and weakened Void Affinity ideally, or in this case, it could be Force or Spirit, to be fair, in terms of affinities. But anyway, someone who could place both of those debuffs without placing any buffs, just so you don't have to worry about your current buffs being their duration being decreased, would be ideal. But I do not have Venus on my account, so we're going to go with the tried and true Lydia, who of course you get from Faction Wars. So let's go ahead and run this team. It's quite quick, and yeah, this is just my way of dealing with the minions. Of course, you can run a Seer composition to kind of blow them up. You can run a Wukong one-shot type composition. You can run a Siegfried one-shot type deal if you have that. But yeah, in this case, I have it specifically designed, or I brought in Marius because I knew that there was a Skull Crown, and Skull Crown is annoying because she has the unkillable, but he can strip that off. And even if there is some bad RNG, he technically he tries 3 times to strip it off. So there's a very, very, very small 3% cubed chance that he can miss it on all 3 attacks, but that's highly, highly unlikely. And so this is a very, very reliable and consistent team. So Harima does the bulk of the damage to soften up and kill most of the minions, and more importantly, trigger Skull Crown's passive. That way the unkillable's up there. Marius comes in after that, cleans it off, but also does damage to the boss, of course. And then Whisper gets the final blows with her massive, massive amounts of damage. Moving on to stage 25, and the team that I'm running is extremely similar, but a couple of swaps here and there. And I swapped it based on, again, my thought being I want this to be a more auto-friendly experience. I don't really want to worry about weak hits and all that other stuff. And so the affinity of the enemies changed, and I guess technically it's all affinities across the board. So I opted to go with a lot of voids in terms of my damage dealers, but that may or may not be available to you. So kind of pick and choose however you want to mix and match your DPSs. But the core of the team is the same. We have Marius doing the same job. We have Lydia as our debuffer. Whisper is the cleanup crew once we get to kill the minions and get to the boss. I traded Siphi for Elva in this case because the boss does get a turn, and Siphi, of course, does not cleanse, so she kind of has to start with her ability, or with her buffing ability, which kind of leads him or activates his passive. In this case, we let him get a turn, let him place the ensnare whenever he cycles through after the minions are dead, of course, and then we can cleanse it off with the Elva, and then she's in a protection set, so there is a chance that we can protect our debuffs or our buffs after we cleanse, and then Narcisse is just another nuker for the squad. So we can super rate this because this is my normal farming team, and hopefully we get some good RNG. I did have a couple of bad RNG runs earlier during some trials testing where we just didn't play decrease defense and weaken on everyone, but looks like we're in the clear, so we get a good run. Narcisse goes first this time just based on their speeds. Marius goes after that, he kills everyone else, and then Whisper goes in a 3 into a 2, so she's not quite strong enough to one-shot here. Oh, extra turn, relentless proc. We love to see that. But yeah, he gets a turn here, and that's fine. He does that. He gets the cleanse off. Soul Reap happens to bring it low, but then Elva cleanses off the ensnare. That way we can have our turn meter fill as needed, and then Narcisse comes in for the kill shot. Block revive there, I guess, because the boss happened to have some extra buffs on him at that time. But yeah, that's the stage 25 team. I think this best team here, or the best time here, was when like Whisper's relentless set just kind of went crazy and she just finished him off with like 3 extra turns back to back to back, which could happen, but that's not typical. This is a more typical run, about 30 seconds or so, where Whisper does the bulk of the damage to the boss, Marius does the bulk of the damage to the minions, Narcisse does a decent amount of damage to the minions, Marius gets 1 extra A1, and then Narcisse comes in for the killing blow. All right, so as usual, let's quickly go through the champions featured on these teams, and I will definitely preface this by saying all of these champions are in extremely end game builds, so we probably won't be able to copy them exactly as they are, but the core concept is all that you really need to understand here. Kill the minions, the boss can't really kill you after that, and then have some solution to kill the boss after you deal with the minions again. It could be a Wukong type one-shot splash damage thing, could be a Seer, it could be whatever you have that can work for that, and once you kill the minions, the boss is basically kind of there for the taking. Anyways, so let's start off with my Harima build. This is my arena build for my Harima. She is in lethal and killstroke, and she is one of the few champions on my account that is 6-star awakened, purchased through the Soul Merchant, slowly but surely over time. Lots of ascended gear as well, nearly fully ascended on hers in her case. But anyways, total stats here: 50,000-ish on the HP, 7.2k on the defense, 266 on the speed, full crit rate, 363 on the crit damage. And then we don't really care that much about her accuracy, but with blessings and whatnot, she's close to 300-ish, which is enough sometimes to land on some squishier mobs. In terms of a relic, I do have the Gilded Dragonstone on her, so she gets a bit more defense when she receives damage, which obviously gives her flat defense as a good, more damage in that regard, but also a little bit more toughness. In terms of the gemstones, I do have some good stuff on her. So she does have the ignore defense effects are 12% less effective against the wearer, so it synergizes with her passive as well that already reduces it by 50%. So when she's on the team, she's a lot harder to kill than you might imagine on paper. And then here, if there's a big hit coming her way, like a Georgid, for example, it'll reduce the amount of damage she'll take by 10%. So again, just trying to keep her tanky, keep her alive, and make sure that her passive and other things are doing their job. Of course, she is fully booked for the blessing. I have Ward of the Fallen, again, trying to go with the anti-one-shot type strategy here, just to extra toughness to keep her alive. Although I've considered changing this out for other blessings, but I haven't yet pulled the plug on that, or pull the trigger on that. And then for the masteries here, fairly generic nuker masteries here. Shield breaker, just because bolster is still a thing, but there's a lot of shield champions that are kind of coming back into the meta since Narcisse kind of fell out of the highest of the peak of the meta. Then Cycle of Violence for the cooldown reduction, and then Helm Smasher, of course, to ignore as much defense as possible. And then the defense tree, you want more defense, good for damage, good for survivability. And then Retribution, of course, when she counterattacks, especially against Demon Spawn, she has a really, really high chance of just killing whoever attacked her, because again, as we have built her, she's very likely to survive an initial onslaught of damage. Next up, we have my Siphi the Lost Bride, who is in an 8-piece protection, not quite 9-piece, waiting for a Undead Horde banner. But anyways, I digress. In terms of her total stats, 104,000 on the HP, so super, super tanky, 4k on the defense, 390 on the speed, just shy of 400, but she is one of my fastest champions on my account. And then 678 on the resistance, so high resistance, high speed, high HP, of course, PvP in mind, but of course she can always fit into any team. Of for PvE as needed. In terms of a relic, I do have one of my 5-star Journals of Necrotus. It's a rare relic, so it's relatively easy to get, but more HP, more defense, and more resistance. Heals and turn meter effects are boosted, so it just, since she's one of the turn meter fillers in the game with like the least amount of turn meter fill, this just kind of helps improve her capabilities there. And then I do have this on her, this gemstone on her, a mythical one nonetheless, but I don't know if this is the best use case for this one, but essentially, whenever if she dies and she gets revived, she takes less damage, but in most cases, if she's the one who dies, then the fight's over. So I don't know how I feel about that one just yet, but I've been testing it out on her because I don't really know who else it would really go on. But I digress. Fully booked, of course, and then a 6-star, another champion who I bought their souls up through the Soul Merchant, up to 6-star with Intimidating Presence, of course, because she doesn't have a speed aura, but she is kind of, a speed champion. And so typically whoever the speed aura on the team is going to get the benefit. The blessing. In terms of the masteries, I opted for more like tankiness, survivability stuff, so we go defense and support. So more HP, a little bit of healing, extra stats from Lore of Steel, but we make sure to come back to Spirit Haze to get more speed. Lasting Gifts, you want to extend her buffs. And then the defense tree, extra resistance here, lots of tankiness stuff, Resurgent, Delay Death. Solidarity gives you a little bit of extra resistance. She places 3 buffs on her big money ability, so that just makes sense, gives her a little bit more robustness. Shadow Heal can heal her up. And then extra resistance here on Unshakable. Granted, I think a lot more people prefer to go with Timely Intervention, but make of that what you will. But I like having my champions like Siphi, or at least in protection sets, I like them to have high resistance just because they can resist things ideally. But in the current, in the state of the game right now, I think you really need like 800 plus if you want to reliably resist most things for an average player. Obviously at the super high end, you probably need like 900, which is kind of crazy. Anyways, moving on. Next up, we have my Whisper, who is in a Cruel set alongside a Relentless set with one piece of Merciless. So Relentless being the main thing that we kind of got to witness there a little bit. But in terms of her total stats, 43,000 on the HP, 7k, 7.4k-ish on the attack, 253 on the speed, 75 crit rate. You don't need full crit rate because she provides it herself on her A3, increased crit rate, so you build her to 70%, kind of like a Cold Heart. And then 302 on the crit damage. Don't really care about her accuracy all that much. In terms of a blessing on her, I just have a 2-star Malefic Talent. So the rare, fairly common relic that you'll have, and just extra crit damage is all I'm really looking for. There's a chance that she deals a little bit more damage, and sometimes, instead of hitting 500k, she'll hit 600k, and I know that the talent procced. But I don't bank on that happening, but it is nice if it does happen. In terms of the gemstone, I do have the Ignore Defense if the target's under 2 or more debuffs. Typically, you want her with someone who can place decrease defense and weaken, so they're always going to have 2 debuffs, so you just ignore a little bit more defense. Granted, of course, her A2 ignores defense entirely if they're under a weaken, but for her other abilities, she can do a little bit more damage based on that. Fully booked, of course, she's an epic, and then 6-star Crushing Rend obviously makes the most sense if you can pull it off. But if you have a 5-star and below, then you definitely want to run Phantom Touch because the bonus damage scales off of her attack, which you're going to have high attack on her, and so that will definitely work until you get up to 6-star. In terms of the masteries here, this is kind of the boss killing build for a Whisper, pretty standard. Pretty much the entirety of the left-hand side of the offense tree, but make sure to bank over 2 Cycle of Violence, because if you're dealing with a squishier boss or something, you can actually exceed, well, there is no cap, I guess, to raw damage, but you can actually get cooldown reductions on her abilities, potentially War Mastery, because she is, a boss-killing machine. And then the defense tree, because we don't really care, at least I don't really care that much about her accuracy. A little bit of extra survivability, Resurgence, same thing as kind of the Siphi route, Delay Death, and then, or not the Siphi route, the Harima route, and then the counterattack. If she happens to survive, even though she's really squishy, if she happens to survive, she can get a hit back. And then when you combine that with Life Drinker, she might actually heal herself if she's below 50%. And of course, she does a lot of damage, so that heal can be absolutely monumental. Next up, we have my Lydia, who currently is in a 6-piece protection set. Thinking with, or my thought around this was kind of Chimera focused, just to protect her strength and whatnot. But ideally, long term, I'm just looking for mainly the accessories, I would say. But I want her in a 9-piece Feral set. I just don't have the gear to pull it off just yet. But that's the long term goal. But for now, 6-piece protection with Perception is the way that I'm going. And in terms of the stats here, we have 67,000 on the HP, 4k on the defense, 293 on the speed, so on the faster side, 460 on the resistance, and then 480 on the accuracy. Again, thinking of all the way up through Ultra Nightmare, Chimera. And so she has a high accuracy to deal with that, but also enough resistance to deal with like Doom Tower and other areas that I use her as well. She's kind of my universal debuffer, as you'd expect. No relic on her. don't really think there's one that's great on her personally. But maybe there is some rare epic one I could just toss on just for S's and G's, but it doesn't really matter to me. Fully booked, of course. Brimstone, just the 1-star. I think that's a Soul Merchant again. I just haven't got anything higher, but ideally, ideally this would be 5-star plus in terms of the Brimstone. But I've also seen a decent, or I also understand an argument when it comes to Chimera for Nature's Bounty, which I believe does allow you to potentially place the big version of Fear. When she, A1's on the Ram form of Chimera, you can turn the basic Fear into a true Fear, which is just a lot more powerful. So I think that's another way you can go if she's like super Chimera focused. But general utility, I think Brimstone is the way to go. Then for the masteries, defense and support tree, you could go for the offense tree if she's definitely PvE focused and you want to get to the accuracy. But for me, in terms of her build being high accuracy, high resistance, I just needed the extra stats. So support tree, lots of the debuffer stuff here, ultimately coming down to Eagle Eye through Master Hexer, of course, to extend the debuffs. Her buffs aren't as important to me. Otherwise, you could go the Y split, get lasting gifts as well. But I care more about her landing her debuffs than the increased speed and strengthen. And then the defense tree, a little bit more tanky and stuff, kind of the Siphi-esque route. A little bit extra resistance when she places her buffs, a little bit of healing, delayed death, resurgent, etc., and then the counterattacking really strong in Chimera, especially whenever the Ram form places stuns. You can counterattack with deterrence and place the, well, naturally she doesn't naturally anyway, so I guess it's redundant, but still you can counterattack and place the Fear on the Ram form, which could potentially save your DPS from murdering themselves. Next up we have Elva Autumnborn, who recently got into a full 9-piece protection set, so stay tuned for a showcase on Elva coming relatively soon. But yeah, a little bit more deep dive into all of her gear pieces, but 9-piece protection, the ultimate goal, was finally achieved. And yeah, in terms of the total stats, 76,000 on the HP, 47k or 4,700 on the defense, 300 on the speed, and then 571 on the resistance. So enough resistance, more so for PvE encounters, but definitely not enough for a high level arena play. In terms of relics, I do have a golden elixir on her, even though it gives her attack, which is a bit of a bummer. Mainly it's just for the effect of the relic itself, where you just get healed when you get below 50%, and she is, a tanky, or meant to be a tanky reviver, and I don't want her to die, because if she dies, especially in Chimera, then everyone else is basically dead. So in terms of the gemstones, resistance for more buffs she places. She does place a lot of buffs, a lot of heals, a lot of block debuffs, increased speed, etc., and veils as well. And then when she gets hit with a crit, she increases her defense even more, so she becomes more tanky. Fully booked, of course. Nourish is the blessing on her. She's only at 3 stars, but it just helps, or it can restore destroyed max HP based on continuous heals that are placed by the champion. Again, she does place a lot of those with her passive and her A1. And then also, it just boosts the potency of the continuous heals that she happens to place in her kit. For the masteries, defense and support tree once again, and then this one's a little bit special in terms of the way I opted for, because she is a healer with her passive. She kind of has the Cylindrix passive where you just heal by taking turns, and so we definitely wanted to boost her HP and boost as much healing as possible. So all the left hand side of the support tree. Lasting gifts, of course, because she has a lot of juicy buffs that you do want to extend. Lore Steel banked over there because I want the stats. Rapid response because she plays a lot of buffs, and then of course Spirit Haste being a reviver. And then on the defense tree, getting as much of the tankiness stuff as possible. Blast proof, extra resistance, resurgent, delay death, etc. Retribution, of course, counterattacking gets more continuous heals out there. And then unshakable is the ultimate prize there. More resistance again, thinking more PvE minded. But if you do have her in like a stone skin build or whatever for arena, then you probably want to opt more for timely intervention once again. Next up, we have my Marius build, who is in 4-piece feral and 4-piece lethal. The thought there is that he's kind of an anti-Armand's type of champion, where he can come in and try to reduce our turn meter, but of course he's immune to that. You get a free counterattack, but then the feral set protects him from getting stunned. Obviously stone skin could do the same thing, but I'm not going to get into that right now. In terms of the total stats, 51,000 on the HP, 6k ish on the defense, 261 on the speed. I wish that was higher, but that's just the extent of my gear. Full crit rate, 300% ish on the crit damage. I wish that was higher as well. And then the 460 on the accuracy, which is good enough, I would say, especially before he places increased accuracy. Gets that up to around 600, which is generally speaking enough for PvP or PvE content across the board. In terms of a relic, I do have one of my cat's gazes on him. And in terms of the gemstones, 5-star cat's gaze, I might specify there. We do have the ignore defense thing once again. So if they're under 2 or more debuffs, he ignores 6% of the target's defense, which helps him get closer to the enemy max HP caps, particularly again thinking in Chimera where they have really high defense and it's hard to hit the cap sometimes, especially without decreased defense and weaken out there all the time. And then every time he kills an enemy, this is more PvP focused, but he increases his damage by 10%, stacking up to 30%. So thinking about using him in both PvE and PvP alike, the gemstones kind of split the difference between the benefits there. Fully booked, of course, Soul Reap is my blessing of choice. However, once I get him up to 6-star, and you can see he's currently at 5-star, he's the current project for the Soul Merchant. So I do not have the 300 essence just yet. But once I do have enough and he comes around in the shop, then I will probably switch over to 6-star, or switch over at 6-star to Crushing Rend. But for now, I'm running Soul Reap. Just because that threshold is very juicy in a lot of situations. And then when it comes to the masteries, this is a somewhat kind of a mix between PvE and PvP utility. So the offense tree, we're ultimately ending on Helm Smasher for the more PvP side of things, but also you want Cycle of Violence because you're hitting the enemy max HP cap in most cases, and hitting exactly 30% damage can trigger this, so you can reduce the cooldown of his big triple hitter AoE. And then all the stuff on the left hand side is mostly PvE focus, more damage to bosses and things with high HP. Support tree, I think this is the best way to go. I know a lot of people like the defense tree because it's kind of, you know, standard nuker. But I like the extra accuracy from these two, or I guess these three things, lower steel for extra stats. But mostly, I like the sniper to increase the chance of landing enfeeble on the A1, and then master hexer to potentially extend the enfeeble to 2 turns, which could be absolutely devastating for your enemies, especially if you're going against like an Empress or something who can change forms and then do an extra turn. Well, he still has enfeeble on him for those 2 turns, and so he can't really do anything against that, which can be quite useful. Last but not least, we have my White King Narcissus, who is just in a 4-piece lethal set. So in terms of his total stats, 100k on the HP, 107,000 to be more precise, 3,200 on the defense, 265 on the speed, overcapped on crit at 111, but that's just the mix and match of the gear for HP based nukers, and 336 on the crit damage. And again, another 6-star awakened champion who was purchased slowly but surely through the Soul Merchant over time. And then we don't care about his accuracy or his resistance because he's predominantly an arena nuker, but sometimes I just throw him into dungeons and whatnot as needed. In terms of the relic, he has one of my Hatter's reserves just at 2 stars, nothing crazy there. But when enemies have lower max HP than his, then he deals a bit more damage, so that's kind of why I was opting for that, but also it gives him a little bit more HP. In terms of the gemstones, a couple are a rare and an epic, nothing crazy here once again, but when you attack him, he destroys a little bit of your max HP, and then he does more damage to targets under shield. I don't know if that really works with his passive just because he ignores shields entirely. And so I assume that this actually helps, but I can't actually prove that it does. Or maybe I could in like a Doom Tower run or anything, but I haven't done that. Anyways, fully booked once again. Word of the Falling blessing, kind of with Harima thoughts in mind here, just to kind of keep him alive. Rebuilding those stacks as needed. And then for the masteries, pretty much identical to Harima, except we don't want Shield Breaker because he ignores shield, so it doesn't really work in that way. But this kind of the same logic. Cycle of Violence to reduce the cooldown if he happens to do a lot of damage, and then ultimately ending on Helm Smash to ignore as much defense as possible. And the defense tree, hopefully he can survive and then counterattack if he happens to get that off. So there you have it. That's going to be my approach this time around for this iteration of the event dungeon. Like I said, this is definitely one of the easier ones, and as long as you can kill the minions, you're basically good to go with whatever strategy you want to use in terms of killing the boss. I have a favoritism towards Whisper. I love using her whenever possible. We kind of do a bonus run here, but I like to throw her in whenever possible against bosses, specifically in dungeons, because of her aura, which is really strong. But yeah, this is definitely one of the easier dungeons, and I think this is probably more balanced. However, I will admit that stage 30 is a bit annoying, like I talked about with Hosang Clef, just because he has a passive that can kind of cut in when you least expect it, which is very tricky sometimes to deal with. So I think stage 20 is your best bet if you're kind of just trying to go with the easiest thing to do that still gives you a decent amount of rewards. And then stage 25 is basically identical, just you have to manage the minions a little bit differently depending upon what your strategy is for killing the minions. And then if you want to push your luck, try to be better than me, you can farm stage 30 on auto as well. Let me know in the comment section down below what your strategy is for this iteration of the event dungeon. I'm curious to know what your teams are, as well as how long your runs are. And as always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And feel free to hit the subscribe button down below as well, if and only if you're enjoying the content overall on this channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.